Hello everyone, this is Paul the Oaken Knight coming back to you for a second time with part two of my effort to redesign my current game table into something that is more towards what I need. When you're doing a project such as this, the design is actually one of the most fun parts of the project. I love the design stage of any project that I'm doing. This is where you get to think wide open. It's divergent thinking. Whatever you can dream up is fair game. I took advantage of that and came up with a few different designs over an extended period of time to try to decide what it is I want to do, and more specifically than just the broad brush ideas. What you are now seeing is basically the bottom-up view of my table as I envision it in its final state. So those blue ovals are basically the legs of the table, the columns that actually support the structure. The racetrack pattern you see is the existing game table surface, which as I said earlier, it varies between 1 inch in the center and 2 inches around the perimeter of the table. So it is a good, stout, thick tabletop. Then you see the plywood that's going to extend the tabletop. And beyond that, you see the perimeter, which is going to be the apron of the table, the new side of the table. Game tables are basically glorified boxes when you think about it. Two-level tables have a removable top. It's just a box with a removable top. And so the orange you see going around the perimeter of the table is basically the side of the box. And most of the effort is actually going into working on that, getting that the way it needs to be and actually made correctly so that it comes together okay. Now, one of the things that you may notice is that the plywood extends beyond the current tabletop. And that's by design because it kind of has to. To put the new sides of the table on, you have to have something to attach it to. I'm using something called a dado, which is a fancy name for a groove, down the full length of this side that actually exactly fits the plywood that's extending beyond the current tabletop. So one of my goals in this project, as I mentioned in my last video, is to be conservative in how much I increase the height and the width, especially because there are limits to what people can physically handle as far as the width of the table, the height of the table, and so forth. This area here is really about 1 inch on each side, and the dados in the side panels here, the sides of the box, recess into that. The plywood is going to go beyond 8 by 4. So I had to come up with a way of doing that. And when I do the build, you'll actually see it. It's basically taking 3 pieces of plywood and cutting them precisely so they fit together to form something larger than an 8 by 4 surface. As far as the design of the table goes, the first thing that came to my mind was what I would call an inlaid tabletop, which is this. If this is the second level of table, here's the first level of table. It inlays into the structure so it's even with the side pieces going around the periphery of the table. The green here is my current original tabletop. You're taking a side-on view. Above that's going to be a plywood. Not shown is the actual surface that I'm going to put on top of the plywood to make it nice. There's various options for that I will get into later, but to keep it simple, I'm just showing the plywood. So this design would require me to mill out 2 different pieces of hardwood to make this come together. Or I guess you could do it in one, but you would have probably a 3-inch thick board that you were doing it from and having to mill out a whole bunch of material. Now, one of the things that I didn't mention in the earlier slide is this board here, this would be like 9 foot long. And one of the things that I thought that was pushing things. So what I did is I actually cut it in the middle. So this is actually like 2 4.5 foot boards that I'm going to rejoin. What that does is it gives me a much easier piece of wood to work on. 4.5 feet is pretty normal. There's nothing unusual about handling a board that's that long. But 9 feet, that's kind of pushing it. And so I decided to sidestep that whole issue. And I'm going to do something creative to hide the seam so that basically I don't think people will ever be aware that I cut the board down the middle. So anyway, this inlay design, I think you see this all over the place in the professional made tables. I decided not to do this, partly because it's kind of a hog as far as how much material it takes. This extra piece of wood is another piece of hardwood that you got to shell out for when you put the thing together, and especially if you get it all in one 3-inch thing that you're actually milling things out of. It's going to be an expensive board, and you need, of course, 4 of them to go around the table. So I decided to simplify that. The other thing that this does, you can see how this part that holds up the second level of the table is actually coming into the playing area. So it's reducing the playing area below which it could otherwise be. And this section up here is always there. Remember, one of my goals is to try to minimize the increase in height and the increase in width of the table. And then, unless you have the second level of the table actually on the table, this is actually dead space. It doesn't really do anything, and it's not even an armrest. If you put an armrest down here, like let's say something like that, then the thing that the top level rests on goes in even farther, and you lose even more playing surface on the table. So I saw that there were some issues and problems with this that I decided to keep my thinking cap on and see what I could do to get around. The second idea I came up with was basically trying to simplify the whole thing, because I thought that the prior design was starting to look rather overblown and complicated. And when I actually priced it out, I said, yeah, this is getting overblown and complicated. So what I did is say, okay, what happens if I come up with a single level design for the table? Well, okay, so here's my existing table. There's my existing table. This is a single sheet of plywood going over it. Okay. 3/4 inch plywood. I decided not to mess around when I was looking at this part of it. I say this is just hanging in space, and so I did not want to have only a 1/2 inch plywood. I went for 3/4, and I also found that once you attach the side rails, it firms this up, so it's just about as solid as the table itself. Okay, so that's all well and good. But in the single level table, all you're doing is this is your side pieces for the table, for the box that you're making, except there won't be a box, there won't be any top, and there'll be very little in the way of sides. And then this is your armrest, essentially. You glue those together, you mill out what in this case we'd call a rabbet rather than a dado, but it's the same idea. And you can attach it to the table. There's also things you can use to actually really attach this firmly, something called a Miller dowel, which I have used before, I really like. It's basically a cross between a wedding cake and a golf tee. If you think of it that way, it'll make sense. I'll show you one. And it has a special drill bit, and it would drill right through and into that table. And then you could cut it off flush with the side of the table. They look very nice. They're made out of good hardwoods, and they would blend in very nicely, even as a decorative thing, even though it would be functional as well. But in this case, I just thought that, Paul, you said you wanted a 2-level table so that you could, more easily deal with making YouTube videos and having friends over and still retain what you have playing down at this level. And so I decided that, I'm going to try to stick to my guns and to come up with another design that may allow me to do that. All right, and the third general design I came up with was this. Instead of a inlaid table, it's an over-the-top design. So the second level is actually going to rest right upon the armrests that are on that are fixed to the side of the table. So if this is the armrest, here's the main side of the table that we've been seeing. This is just going to sit right on top of it. Now, I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to try to do something to fix that in place. I think that can be done without too much trouble. Or am I going to just let friction be my friend and let this just sit on top without anything firmly holding it? When you're talking about something that's something north of 8 foot by 4 foot, there's going to be a pretty fair amount of weight there, so I'm not so sure I need to do anything. So that won't be seen until I actually build the table, and if I have to do something, I can put a little cleat right about there, and that would fix it in place in one direction. I put those around the table in various spots, and guess what? That tabletop is not going anywhere. Okay, so with this design, I've got the the main side of the table, a single dado. Okay, here's the current table. And then here's my armrest. Now, one of the things I decided to do is you see how the armrest is overhanging both inside and out. I think armrests need to be something at least 3 inches across. Okay, and this nominally was 1.5 inches. Actually, it turned out to be slightly wider than that, but not too much. And so I wanted to have something that you could actually rest your arm upon, your elbows and whatnot, to feel comfortable. So I cheated and I'm going to extend it slightly to the inside, probably about 3/4 of an inch, and probably a full inch to the outside. And I think they'll serve a dual purpose of having the armrest being wider, but also something I can clamp things to. If I want to have some things attached to the table, I could go ahead and do it on this overhang. Okay. Now, the other thing that you've seen in all these diagrams is the space between the current table and the new table side. And that partly is because I want to make sure there's room for wood movement. Wood always moves, okay? It doesn't get longer, but it can get higher and wider. And if you don't leave space in certain areas, you can have problems with so much pressure being placed by the wood as the moisture in the air causes it to expand that it actually can make the wood sort of explode. So with this big piece of wood here, it's going to expand up and down and left and right. Okay, and if it goes this way, I don't want it putting pressure on the actual table. So this is here partly to allow room for wood expansion. Okay, but here you see I have my 2 levels, and I am not infringing on the actual playing surface, although I am a little bit here, but I'm not going to worry about 3/4 of an inch, and if I don't like that, I can get rid of it. The other thing is that there's no part of the side of the table structure above the armrest, so it's that wasted space in the vertical would be here. That's not here. It's designed completely away. So I like that, and that's one of the reasons why I adopted an over-the-top second level rather than an inlaid second level. Now, the other thing is, okay, the accessories. How are you going to mount those? I said, well, the armrest could actually provide a clamping surface, and for some things, that might be the way to go, and I'm thinking of camera mounts and things like that. But for more simple things, such as, say, a cup holder, the usual way you do that is you affix it to the side of the table by some means, and what you do is you make a generic base plate. So when you're building these things, you pump out, maybe a dozen of them, okay, that are that dimension. Now, what I've done is patterned my side of my table after what the Wood Whisperer did in the Wood Whisperers Guild, although with some changes. Most tables have kind of a hook design where you actually mill sort of a hook into the actual appliance, and it hooks itself into a channel in the side of the table. And there's a guy on YouTube who actually showed how he did that. I think it's ungodly fussy. I mean, it just seems harder to do than it really needs to be. And the second thing is, if this is actually physically hooked into the side of the table, if somebody gets ham-fisted and pushes down on this cup holder trying to get out of their chair, they're going to be putting all the force right here. And all that force with a hook going up is going to be trying to pull the side of the table out and basically turn it into so much kindling for firewood. What I've done is I bought commercial T-track. It's an aluminum track that accepts special bolts that will come through the base plate and have a nut that affixes to it. That will provide stability as you're looking at this diagram going left and right. And then this guy here, now unlike the Wood Whisperer who had this protrude out from the side of the table, I just cut the groove and I'm going to attach the wood to the actual base plate. And so it's going to go into the groove rather than having the base plate having to fit something that's coming out of the table. So with those changes, instead of milling a T-track into the side of the table, as the Wood Whisperer did, and reversing this and having the little piece of wood going into the side of the table rather than having it come out and you fit it into a groove in the base plate. I've pretty much adopted the design from the Wood Whisperer from his guild. All right. Now, the one thing that I haven't really gotten into here is the corner joinery. I mean, sooner or later, all these good side rails are going to have to come together at 90-degree angles as they go around the table. And how you do that, there are some choices there. But mainly, it's going to be a miter joint or a butt joint. And so I puzzled through that, and I will show you how I went about doing that when we start talking about the actual construction of the table, I think. So this is my design. This is how I'm going to put it together. We'll see how well I do. And actually, I'm kind of cheating because I've already launched into construction and I have it at a certain stage where I think I got past the hard part. So I'm kind of pleased about that. All right. So if you guys want to see more, let me know. I'm planning on putting out there as long as I see guys watching what I'm coming up with. That's it for this time. Next time I'm going to get into ideas for how you can put together your table in a relatively simple fashion. I want to touch on that because I know not everybody has all the good tools and things that I have. And I want to at least give you a clue as to how you might do that. And we go on from there. We'll do the build and probably something on finishing and the great reveal, and ta-da, stage one will be complete. I think this is enough for today. So if you haven't subscribed, I'd encourage you to do so and hit the notification bell so you see follow-ons to what I'm going to come up with here, as well as when I get back to reviewing games, which I hope to do way more sooner than later. But for today, I want to thank you for joining me, and I wish you all a pleasant evening.